It was supposed to be a regular afternoon at the dealership. But what happened inside those glass doors, no one would ever forget. His name was David Miller. 36 years old. A hard-working black man. Quiet. Humble. A man who carried himself with dignity, but who had seen his share of disrespect. And today, that disrespect was waiting for him the moment he stepped into the showroom. David wasn't flashy. He wore a plain polo shirt, a pair of worn jeans, and shoes that had seen better days. But on his wrist was a simple watch, a gift from his late father. And in his heart, David carried something the salesman would never see coming. Because while the salesman saw just another man who looked broke, David carried success that couldn't be measured by clothes or by appearances. The salesman's name? Rick Dalton. 42 years old. White. Arrogant. Always chasing commissions. The kind of man who smiled in your face if you looked rich, and mocked you behind your back if you didn't. And when David walked in that day, Rick's smirk told the whole story. "Can I help you, sir?" Rick asked, his tone laced with fake politeness. David nodded. "Yes. I'm looking for a car. Something reliable. Powerful." Rick raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I see. Well, we've got a section of used cars in the back. Maybe something in your budget." The words stung. But David didn't flinch. Instead, he glanced at the sleek black luxury sedan sitting under the showroom lights. "That one," he said calmly. Rick chuckled. "Sir, that's a 2023 S-Class Mercedes. Brand new. Fully loaded." "I'm not sure that's realistic." David's expression didn't change. "I'd like to take a look inside." The salesman sighed. "Look, I don't mean to waste your time. That car costs over $120,000. Maybe you'd be more comfortable with something pre-owned? Something you could afford." The words dripped with disrespect. Other customers glanced over. Some whispered. And David felt the heat of humiliation, not for the first time in his life. But this time, he wasn't going to stay silent. "Are you refusing to show me the car?" David asked. Rick smirked. "I'm just being realistic. That car isn't for everyone. And let's be honest, it's definitely not for you." The insult cut deep. But David only took a breath and stepped closer. "Open the door," he said firmly. The tension in the room rose. Rick rolled his eyes, grabbed the keys, and with exaggerated movements, unlocked the car. "There. Take a look. Dream a little. Maybe one day." But as David slid into the driver's seat, something shifted. The whispers grew louder. People weren't just watching anymore, they were waiting. Waiting to see what would happen when a man who wasn't supposed to belong refused to accept his place. Rick leaned against the car, arms folded. "You know, guys like you always want the biggest, flashiest car. But when it's time to talk numbers, suddenly there's an excuse. Bad credit. No down payment. Should I even bother running it?" David looked him dead in the eye. "Yes. Run it." The salesman laughed, shaking his head, already preparing the humiliation he thought was coming. But as the paperwork ran, something happened Rick never expected. His smirk began to fade. His posture shifted. Because staring back at him was a credit score higher than most of his wealthy clients. And a bank account that could buy the car twice over. Rick swallowed hard. Mr. Miller, it looks like you actually qualify." David leaned forward. "I told you. Run it." For the first time, the power shifted. The man who mocked him was now scrambling, stammering, sweating. And the quiet man who was underestimated was finally standing tall. David's voice was calm, but carried the weight of every insult, every doubt, every time he had been told he wasn't good enough. You judged me by the clothes on my back. You mocked me before you knew my story. But let me tell you something, real wealth isn't loud. It doesn't have to brag. It walks in quietly, and changes the room without a word. The dealership went silent. Other customers nodded. And Rick? He couldn't meet David's eyes. David signed the papers. The car was his. And as he held the keys, he looked back at Rick with one final lesson. Never underestimate a man just because he doesn't look the way you expect. Because respect costs nothing. But disrespect? That could cost you everything. The salesman had nothing left to say. His arrogance had crumbled. And justice, sweet, quiet justice, filled the room. But just when it seemed the story was over, the real twist was only beginning. Because as David drove off the lot in his brand new car, a call came through on his phone. It wasn't just any call. It was a warning. Mr. Miller, this isn't over. That salesman you embarrassed? He has friends. Powerful friends. And they're not going to let this slide. David's grip tightened on the wheel. The battle wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about something bigger. Something darker. And what was coming next would test David's strength in ways he never imagined. Because this wasn't the end of the story. This was only the beginning. David thought it was over. He thought the humiliation was behind him. But the truth? That moment in the dealership was just the beginning. Because Rick Dalton wasn't just a salesman. He was a man with connections and a bruised ego. And when men like Rick feel embarrassed, they don't forgive. They retaliate. The next morning, David pulled up in his brand new Mercedes, the engine purring like a lion. Heads turned. Neighbors waved. His son, Malik, 12 years old, ran out with excitement. "Dad! This is ours," he shouted, wide-eyed. David smiled, handing him the keys for a moment. "Ours. Remember, son, they'll always judge us by how we look. But never let anyone decide what you can or can't have." It should have been a proud moment. But across the street, a black SUV idled quietly. Inside sat Rick, phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah. That's the house. Do what you have to do." Later that day, David returned to the dealership for routine paperwork. When he walked in, the energy was different. The whispers were louder. Some employees looked away. Others smirked. At the front desk stood a tall man in an expensive suit. Sharp jawline. Slicked back hair. The kind of man who reeked of money and arrogance. "Mr. Miller, is it?" he asked smoothly, extending a hand. "I'm Jonathan Price, regional manager. I understand there was a situation yesterday." David eyed him carefully, shaking his hand. "There was disrespect. And I don't tolerate disrespect." Jonathan smiled thinly. "Yes, well, we at Dalton Motors pride ourselves on customer service. But you see, there's been a complication. The financing department flagged your purchase. Apparently, there are questions about your income sources." David froze. He knew exactly what this was. A setup. "You're trying to take the car back," he said flatly. Jonathan leaned in, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let's just say, men like you shouldn't be driving cars like that." It raises eyebrows. The words hit like a dagger. And around them, the employees chuckled quietly, enjoying the spectacle. But David? He didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a thick envelope. "Is this about money? Fine. Here's the full balance. In cash. Right now. The room went silent. Jonathan's smirk faded. Employees stopped laughing. And in that instant, David flipped the script once again. You see, David said firmly, what you can't take from me is ownership. Not just of this car, but of my dignity. My worth. My story. You tried to humiliate me. But all you've done is expose yourself. He dropped the envelope on the desk with a satisfying thud. But just when it seemed justice had been served again, the room grew colder. Because from the corner, Rick Dalton stepped forward, his face red with rage. You think this is over, Miller? He spat. You embarrassed me in front of everyone yesterday. Men like you don't get the last laugh. Not in my town. The tension was electric. Employees shifted uncomfortably. Even Jonathan looked uneasy. David locked eyes with Rick. You already lost. And deep down, you know it. Rick's hands shook with fury. And then he leaned in, his voice low but venomous. You don't know who you're dealing with. I've got friends in places that make judges look small. You're going to regret ever stepping foot in this dealership. That night, David drove home, the weight of Rick's words heavy on his mind. Malik greeted him at the door, excited to sit in the car again. Maria, David's wife, looked worried. Something's wrong, she said softly. David tried to reassure her. They just don't want to see us win. But they can't stop us. But as he spoke, flashing lights filled the street. 3 police cruisers screeched to a stop outside his home. Officers jumped out, hands on their weapons. David Miller, one shouted. Step away from the vehicle. You're under investigation for fraud and illegal activity. That car is being seized immediately. Maria gasped. Malik clung to his father's arm. And David? He stood frozen, rage burning inside him. He looked toward the SUV parked across the street. Inside, Rick Dalton sat smirking, phone in hand. This wasn't just about a car anymore. This was war. David raised his hands slowly, but his voice cut through the night. You can take this car. You can take these lies. But the truth? The truth always finds a way out. And when it does, I'll be the one standing. The officers dragged him toward the cruiser. Maria shouted. Malik cried out for his father. But just before the door slammed shut, a black luxury car pulled up beside the flashing lights. The door opened. And out stepped a figure David recognized immediately. Tall, dignified, powerful, someone who could change everything. The crowd gasped. Rick's smirk disappeared, and David's eyes widened. Because the man stepping out of that car wasn't just anyone. It was someone with the power to turn this entire situation upside down. But who he was would be revealed in Part 2. Subscriber for more.